بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا مزيدا إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. This is our second class on the explanation of the Fiqh book, Zad al-Mustaqna, the Siyam section. We left off yesterday talking about how Fiqh books are organized. We said, and where we left off is that they usually name their chapters Kitab, like what we're doing here, Kitab al-Siyam. Then subsections under Kitab would be Bab. Then if they need subsections under Bab, it would be called Fasl. That's where we left off. The next point you need to know is usually fiqh books go in the order of the well-known hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, that's in Bukhari and other books of hadith. And they also go by the narrations of the hadith of Ibn Umar on the pillars of Islam. What do I mean? I mean that they start the fiqh books with, of course, for example, salah, and the prerequisites of salah before that, like purification. Then they'll move on to zakah. Then they'll move on to siyam. Then they'll move on to hajj, or hajj, then siyam. And a unique thing is that Ibn Umar, like I said, he has one of these hadith, radiallahu anhuma, he narrated some of these hadith. And he narrated from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he mentioned the pillars and he mentioned Hajj and then Siyam. And in another narration he mentioned Siyam and then Hajj. One time Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma was teaching the hadith and he said the pillars of Islam and he stated fasting then Hajj in that order. So a man stood up and corrected him. He said, Ibn Umar, no, it's Hajj and then fasting. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma said, no, it's fasting then Hajj. That's how I heard it from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How did Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma correct this man in that way when he himself, Ibn Umar, has another authentic narration stating the opposite order, like what the man said? Now here's where Nawawi Sharh Muslim said, it appears to me that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma heard it from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam twice with different orders. One with Hajj and then fasting, one with fasting then Hajj. So what Ibn Umar was telling that man is that what I mentioned, the order I mentioned is correct. Siyam and then Hajj is correct. It's not that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma was telling the man that your version is wrong. He's just saying what I said is correct and that's how I heard it from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I said it like I heard it from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just to show the man that there is another narration. And that happens a lot. It happened actually in our Tawheed class. You give a lecture, you mention a hadith, and it has more than one narration. In a talib ilm, he may not be familiar with the many narrations. So someone, the sheikh, may mention a hadith in a different narration. And he gets corrected, thinking by that young person that's the only hadith. And sometimes it happens actually in salah, where the imam is reading in a different qira'ah, and he gets corrected. They don't know that he's reading in a different qira'ah. I say that because that's basically what An-Nawawi was saying that happened to Ibn Umar. Ibn Umar was not denying the other narration. What he was doing is that he was informing the man that what I said is also correct. And a second scenario that An-Nawawi said is that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma possibly heard both narrations from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, taught them, but when he was talking to this man, he must have forgotten about the other narration. Now Bukhari in his book, Sahih Bukhari, he mentions Hajj and then fasting. And that's for one of two reasons and possibly both reasons together. Why did he mention Hajj then fasting? He possibly used one of Ibn Umar's narrations of Hajj and then fasting. That's one reason. Another reason is that because Hajj has more of a severe warning for those who abandon and leave in it, more than fasting. And that's another reason that he may have mentioned Hajj before fasting, for his reason of mentioning Hajj before fasting. Having said that, the order does not diminish the importance of fasting or Hajj. They're both important, they're both essential, and they're both pillars of Islam. Next, the author starts off with Kitab as-Siyam. The definition of fasting is the first thing we'll start off with. In Lisan al-Arab, linguistically, figuratively speaking, it's to abstain. Like Maryam alayhi salam said, Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawma. It's to abstain from anything. And Maryam, she said, I'm going to vow to abstain. What is she going to abstain from? She said, I'm going to abstain. She meant from talking. How do we know she meant from talking? When she mentioned in her first sentence, I'm going to abstain. I vow to abstain. Because the following sentence says, فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا. I vow not to speak to anyone. That explains what she abstained from. And the Arabs used to say, صَامَ الْفَرَسِ, meaning the camel or the horse would abstain from eating or drinking or moving. They would say, صَام الْفَرَسِ, meaning he's abstaining from either moving or eating or drinking. Ibn Qutayba said everyone who abstains from eating, talking, or walking is considered fasting in the linguistic sense. Now that is the linguistic, but what's more important, what's essential to us is the Shari'i meaning, the Shari'i definition of what fasting is. And there, if you open the books of fiqh, they have numerous versions of what the definition of fasting is. And among the two popular ones that I've chosen is to worship Allah by abstaining from eating, drinking, and other matters that void your fast from pre-dawn to sunset. Or in another definition, which is in the reference book, the fiqh reference book, Muntaha al-Iradat ibn Najjar, he said fasting is to abstain with the intention from specified matters for a specified time by a specified person. إمساك بنية عن أشياء مخصوصة في زمن معين من شخص مخصوص. Let's take it sentence by sentence. It's to abstain with the proper intention. It's to abstain with the proper intention. You must have the intention. That's the first thing. Why must you have the intention? For two reasons. Number one reason you need the intention is to distinguish between worships and traditions. Abstaining from food and water for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is different than abstaining from food because one has a fever or he's too sick to eat, or someone who's trying to go on a diet and lose weight. One who takes a shower in the summer to cool off is different from one who has the intention to take a shower for the sake of Allah to purify himself from the major impurity, whether it may be from intercourse or if a woman has finished her menstrual cycle. The intention differentiates between what a worship is and a tradition is. It's your intention to gain nearness to Allah by doing the act that He taught you. The second reason for intention is to distinguish between worships themselves. Not only between worships and traditions is the first one, but between worships and themselves. Dhuhr is for, Asr is for. How do you know the difference? The intention. When you're traveling, Fajr is 2. If you're going to shorten, Dhuhr is 2, Asr is 2, and Isha is 2. You got 4 salahs that are 2 rak'at each. What differentiates between those? The intention. And the proof for the intention is from the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Ijma'. The Quran, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ, Surah Al-Bayyinah, the 5th ayah. In the hadith, the famous hadith everyone knows, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Verily, actions are by intentions. The intention is also proven by Ijma'. And when we say Ijma', you're going to hear a lot in our class, it means the consensus of the Sahaba or the ulama. The ijma' is a source of proof for us Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. According to the definition that we mentioned, intention is only part of fasting. Then you got to follow it by something else, which is his second statement. From specified matter. Intention, then you got to refrain, abstain from specified matters. Those matters are eating, drinking, relationship, sexual relationship, and other matters that void the fast, which we will study in this book. Then the definition goes on to say, for a specified time. The Sharia specifies the time. I mean, you can't just sit and make up when we're going to fast. From when? It's from pre-dawn, also known as the second Fajr, the Fajr Thani, until sunset, by a specified person. Meaning an adult over the age of puberty who's sane, who's able, who's resident. If it's a woman that's not on her menstrual cycle or on her postnatal bleeding, and we'll study all that inshallah. Keep in mind that the wajib aspect of fast in Ramadan may be a wajib in Ramadan, and it may be a wajib outside of Ramadan. What do I mean by that? It's a wajib on Muslims in Ramadan. That's the majority of the situation. But if someone's traveling, or someone was ill, or a woman on her menstrual cycle, the Ramadan days of fasting become a wajib outside of the month of Ramadan. That's the definition of fasting. Now let's take the ruling on fasting. Ramadan. Ramadan is a fard or a wajib, and it's a pillar of Islam. And I took in the Tawheed classes the difference between wajib and fard. Ramadan is also an action that is known from Islam by necessity. The fact that the obligatory fasting of Ramadan is a matter that is known from Islam by necessity makes one who fully denies the obligation of fasting Ramadan a murtad if he denies it. Not only is there ijma' on the fact that Ramadan is obligatory, but there's an ijma' consensus that whoever denies the obligation of fasting Ramadan is a kafir murtad. Based on the famous well-known rule, if a person denies any action from Islam that is known from Islam by necessity, he is a murtad. The rule is, if a person denies any action that is known from Islam by necessity, he's a murtad and a kafir. Now Ramadan is wajib, and it's proven by the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. From the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. O you who believe, Ramadan has been prescribed upon you as it was prescribed upon those before you, so that you may become among the muttaqun. Kutiba means furida. Kutiba means furida, meaning it's a fard. It's prescribed. Kama kutiba. Kama kutiba, the kaf in the kama is to liken to something else. Fasting is not our specialty of the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was prescribed upon those ummah before us. Some ulama said it means the Christians and the Jews. But the more correct opinion is to keep the meaning of the verse general as the verse is. So fasting is imposed or was imposed on the ummah before us, all of them. And among them is the Jews and Christians, because the verse is general. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, meaning so that you may attain taqwa, which is the fruit of fasting. That's one of the proof. يَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Another proof from the Quran, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ, also in Surah Al-Baqarah. So whoever of you is present at his home, meaning he's not a traveler, he must observe the fasting of that month. The month. He must observe the fasting of that month, which in Arabic is فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمْ الشَّهْرَ. لِلْعَهْدِ الذِّهْنِ. The month, in the verse, means the month that you know. The month that you know we're talking about. The month of Ramadan. You know what month it is. That's what it means. And in Arabic grammar, that the is called للعهد الذكري. فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم. فليصم mean that's an order. And an order means you must accept and you must follow and adhere. From the Sunnah, the proof is, for example, the many hadith on the pillars of Islam. That proves it's wajib. Or the Bedouin who came to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked him about the obligations of Islam, and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, fasting, Ramadan is one of them. In addition to that, there's a hadith that showed the great reward for fasting. كل عمل ابن آدم له إلا الصوم فإنه لي وأنا أجزي به. We spoke about that last year in the series of last year, so there's no need to go over it. Or there's another hadith, وَالصَّوْمُ جُنَّةٌ, fasting is a shield, and I remember that I spoke on that. These are a hadith also, in addition to a hadith that show it's wajib, these are a hadith that show the great reward for fasting. One can restrain and narrow down Sawmu Jinnah, one can restrain and narrow down the passages of the shaitan by controlling his food. And when one doesn't restrain his eating and drinking, the body reclines to the desires. That's why the scholar said, whoever eats excessively, drinks excessively, sleeps excessively, and will lose plenty. So that is how Ramadan is a wajib in the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. When did Ramadan become obligatory? What year? Ibn Hajar al-Haytami said it became wajib in the month of Sha'ban in the second year after the Hijrah. In the month of Sha'ban in the second year after the Hijrah. That means the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam fasted by ijma' of the Islamic historians. He fasted 9 Ramadans. And it happened to be that most of the Ramadans he fasted were 29-day Ramadans. The next point. What were the stages of fasting? The first stage of fasting is the obligatory fasting is fasting Ashura. The second stage is, some said that it was obligatory to fast 3 days every single month. But that's a weak opinion. The second stage in reality was when Ramadan became obligatory by choice. Meaning you either fast or you feed a poor person. It's your choice. You can choose either way. The wisdom behind giving the choice like that in that early stage was to make it easier for people to accept the obligation of fasting Ramadan. And the third stage or level was when Ramadan became obligatory to fast on every single person with no choice. There's no choice in it. Except those who are exempted, and we'll study those who are exempted. Now there's an issue in Usul al-Fiqh that I want to go over that pertains to this. Here we mentioned 3 stages of fasting. Ashura, then the Ramadan by choice, and Ramadan without a choice. You have to fast it. So the fard of fast in Ramadan abrogated Ashura. When Ashura was abrogated by the fasting of Ramadan, that type of abrogation in Usul al-Fiqh is considered abrogation from something that's easy to something more difficult. Why I mentioned this, some ulama denied this type of abrogation. They said this doesn't even exist. But this is a prime example that it does exist. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abrogated Ashura and replaced it with fast in Ramadan. Which one is more difficult? Fast in Ramadan. Ashura was once a year. 1 day a year. And of course, if you want to tag on a day before or after it. That is Ashura. Now it's been abrogated by fasting not 1 day a year, but 29 or 30 days a year. The month, the entire month. It went from something easy to something difficult. That's the first type of abrogation. The second type of abrogation in matters like this is something similar matters. It's not more difficult, nor is it something easier. And I believe the best example would be changing the Qibla, changing the direction of the Qibla from Bayt al-Maqdis to Mecca. The effort in me facing Bayt al-Maqdis or me facing Mecca is the same. So that's an example where a matter was abrogated by something equivalent or similar to it. The third form of abrogation is the opposite of the first one. Abrogation from a difficult matter to something much more easier or something easier. And a good example of that is standing firm in the face of the enemy in the battlefield. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abrogated it to something easier. You had to stand in front of 10 people. Allah said, الْآنَ خَفَّفَ اللَّهُ عَنْكُمْ وَعَلِمَ أَنَّ فِيكُمْ ضَعْفًا. It was reduced down to standing firm in front of only 2 people. Okay, now let's go to the first sentence. The author said, rahimahullah, يَجِبُ صَوْمُ رَمَضَانَ بِرُؤْيَةِ هِلَالِهِ. يَجِبُ صَوْمُ رَمَضَانَ بِرُؤْيَةِ هِلَالِهِ. Ramadan becomes obligatory when its moon is witnessed. That's the statement. The author wanted to point out to 2 things here. The first thing the author wanted to point out here is that Ramadan is wajib or obligatory. And the second thing, that it starts or it's triggered by the sighting of the moon. That's how it starts. So let's take the first point that he wanted to teach us. That Ramadan is wajib or obligatory or a must. It's a wajib. Even though all wajibs are obligatory, you have to do them, some of them are at different levels. Some wajibs are at the level of rukun, like a pillar, a wajib that's a pillar. Some wajibs are at a slightly lesser level. Those are usually wajibs the ulama may have disputed or may not be considered a rukun, which is a pillar, even though they're still a wajib. So in salah matters that are rukun, they're wajib. And then there's other matters that are regular wajib. Both are wajib. But one what's a rukun wajib has a higher status than a regular wajib. If you miss a rukun, a pillar, that's considered a wajib, it's more severe than missing a regular wajib, even though both are wajibs. So if the ulama say it's a rukun of the deen, it's a pillar of the deen, no, rukun of the deen, it's very difficult to find that the ulama disputed that. If it's a rukun of ibadah, a pillar of ibadah, it's wajib. Like if it's a rukun of salah, it may be disputed. Like for example, Surah Al-Fatiha in the salah. It may be disputed. Some of them are disputed, some of them are not. Like ruku' and sujood is not disputed. The Fatiha is disputed. The point is there are many wajibs, and they're all wajibs. You must do them. However, the status of them is slightly different at times. So now we know that fasting is a wajib. Is all fasting a wajib? No. Some of it is wajib, some of it is sunnah. Monday and Thursday is not, it's a sunnah. Wajib is like Ramadan. The author here means the fasting that's wajib. Meaning overall it's considered the ibadah that's a wajib. In Arabic we call it jins al-ibadah. But there's some sunnah fasting. And the intention is what distinguishes between the two. But here overall the ibadah itself is referred to as a wajib ibadah. Jins al-ibadah is wajib. So Ramadan is all wajib. But there's other types of fasting that's sunnah. And there's other types outside of Ramadan that's wajib as well. Some fasting other than Ramadan that's wajib is like what? Like for example, kafara, expiation. For example, having whoever has intercourse in Ramadan with his wife. Or someone who does an accidental killing. Or fulfilling a vow. That's wajib. So there's wajib that's outside of Ramadan. Now, wajib in fasting is 3 categories. And pay attention to this because this will help you know the categories of wajib fasting and how to find them in fiqh books. Wajib in fasting is 3 categories. The first category is wajib due to a specified time. The example is Ramadan. And that's what the author here means, and he's referring to. A specific time comes, it becomes wajib. Ramadan comes, it's wajib. This you'll usually find under Kitab al-Siyam, like what we're studying today. That's where you'll find it in the books of fiqh. And they'll tag possibly a few issues about Sunnah Siyam with it. That's the first category. The second wajib category is the category for a reason, like for kafara, expiation. Not everyone fasts 2 months for accidental killing. It depends on the reason for it to become wajib. Unlike the previous category where it depends on the timing, this one depends on the reason. If the reason happens, you have to do it. Not everyone goes through the circumstance. So it may be wajib for some and not others. This is the wajib fasting for a reason. Where will I find this in the books of fiqh? You will find this category of wajib fasting under not Kitab al-Siyam that we're studying, but under another kitab called Al-Kaffarat, the chapter on expiation. This the third one now. The third type of wajib fasting is the one you make obligatory on yourself, in which the Sharia did not make obligatory on you, and that's what we call a nadhr or a vow. Oh Allah, I shall fast 1 month if you give me a good spouse. Or oh Allah, I'll fast a month if you let me pass this exam. The Sharia didn't impose it on you. And you impose that on yourself. That's actually where we stopped off in our Tawheed class, and we didn't continue. This, you'll find it where in the books of fiqh? And the chapter of vows, of a nadhr. This is something you should take good notes on, because it shows you not only the categories of fasting, but where to refer to them in the big books of fiqh. Okay, the time is up. I went way beyond the time, and that's what happened last year, if you remember. I was always going beyond the time. But jazakum Allah khair for paying attention. Barakallahu feekum. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow from where we left off.